walk me through how do you see each industry being disrupted in the next 10 to 15 years? Like, where does it start? How does it evolve? There was something you said about electric vehicles. So what was the thing that enabled electric vehicles was battery costs coming down. So, and the battery technology getting up to par. And that was the flourishing for electrification. There's a bunch of articles in the last few months that was saying, oh my God, growth's slowing down. But then you look at the data, you're like, yeah, no, it's still one of these things. It's still exponentially growing. China is going to start dumping EVs everywhere. All the studies from Cox and other people are saying that 80% of consumers in the United States by 2028 are going to consider an EV. So it's like obvious where this is going, right? But it was enabled by the battery. Hans and I were talking about this right before you came on, and sorry for stealing your question, Hans, because I'll let you do all the follow-ups, okay? It seems like what is going to enable the humanoid robot to really take off, how Hans is thinking about this, and we assume this is correct, is the revolution in artificial intelligence. It's these LLMs, sort of this thing that you have an artificial intelligence that's taking in data, and then you have an end-to-end neural network approach that then allows the artificial intelligence to decide what to do with that data. So before that, it seemed like a humanoid robot, even though we had the actuators and the batteries and the materials and everything, the brain was the missing piece. And now it seems like with things like OpenAI, with things like these advanced, like that Go computer and all these different, DeepMind and all these things, that was the enabler for humanoid robots to start taking off. Is that how y'all view it as well from your end? And Hans, if you want to add any extra color, feel free to do so as well.
To a first approximation, the limiting factor with robotics has been the software. It's been the brains. It's been the intelligence. And we simply didn't have the AI technology up until very recently, right? So I think that it's totally accurate to say that was the chief limiting factor. I mean, other aspects of robotics are improving now rapidly, very rapidly. And there have been advances. I mean, it really helps to have batteries be at their current level of cost and capability than the batteries we had 20 years ago, right? I mean, it would have been much more expensive, if not outright impossible, to power a humanoid robot with a small form factor battery for an extended period of time, if it weren't for the amazing progress in battery technology we've had, thanks to other applications of it in consumer electronics and now electric vehicles and so forth. So there are, as we've seen in other technology disruptions, the convergence of multiple technologies makes these new products possible, but they're often bottlenecked by a single key roadblock, and then none of them are able to advance as a result of that. So we could, in an alternate universe where AI had been cracked 50 years ago, I suspect, probably, we would have then had much more progress alongside that in actuators and motors and batteries and all the rest of it, because there would have been the incentive to do all of that investment, to do all that R&D, to do all of that scaling and learning. And I think that this is a pattern that fundamentally holds across all technologies. So the limiting factor is a key thing to identify and understand for technology and disruption, no matter what domain it occurs in. So we could point to other ones. In the case of electric vehicles, I think you could certainly argue that limiting technology was batteries. The other components have certainly improved as well. The motors are vastly better than they were a generation ago. Way better than they were 100 years ago when the first electric cars were created. But nevertheless, I think a strong argument could be made that it was the one technology, the energy storage technology, the batteries, that prevented more R&D from occurring than otherwise might have. So things do get bottlenecked on a single technology. I think that's perfectly fair. The one thing that I wrote about, gosh, almost 10 years ago now, was that I suspected in the early days of the autonomous vehicle race, that when Google first entered, before Waymo existed, and when Tesla was real early in, I suspected that a big part of the initial play from the tech giants wasn't because they wanted to become robotaxi companies, but was because this killer app, this incredible use case, enormously valuable, enormous market use case for self-driving vehicles, robots on wheels, would crack open the door to robotics of all kinds. And so my thesis, going back a decade or almost, has been that the same technology that you would need in terms of artificial intelligence to successfully model and navigate a complex 3D environment with other agents and moving objects and obstacles and so forth in it. That is what a car has to do when it's driving, in downtown Manhattan or the streets of Paris or wherever it happens to be. That same artificial intelligence would be the key to robotics applications of all kinds. And I honestly thought that was the original play from Google when they appeared to be at the forefront and sinking enormous sums of money and other resources into the development of self-driving vehicles. This is going back a decade. And then it didn't surprise me at all, for example, when Tesla announced the Optimus robot. So I remember when that dropped, and the general view was very confused. People were, is this an April Fool's joke? Is this one of Elon Musk's funny, quirky senses of humor? Right? But no, I mean, that lined up perfectly with stuff I'd been publishing, which is that these two applications, robots on wheels in the form of self-driving vehicles, and then robots in other forms, humanoid being a key one, those come out of the same underlying technology that Farzad, like you were saying, has been a limiting factor, the intelligence, the AI. And it does feel now that that dam has broken open. And now we're on this explosive trajectory upwards in that capability.
Was curious, and maybe you kind of have answered the question just now, but perhaps we could go a little bit deeper into it. What brought you specifically and Tony and the RethinkX team to focus on the humanoid robot opportunity as the next major disruption, instead of, there are lots of other candidates, I'm sure, that are out there that you could focus on. And, the disruption of intelligence itself in the form of artificial intelligence might make a good candidate as well. So, yeah, what brought you to the humanoid form factor specifically, and why that one and not something else? When you stop and think about it,
it's like, oh yeah, our entire world's built for the human form. Both the nuances of it and also the general scale. I mean, if you had a robot that was 15 feet tall, it wouldn't fit in most, houses, most buildings, most work areas. If it was only 15 inches tall, it wouldn't be able to reach half the things that are in the environment. So the humanoid form makes good sense. Human beings are demonstrably a pretty good general purpose tool using platform. Compared to other animals, we're pretty darn good as far as just general tool users go. A bipedal form with appendages, opposable thumbs on the end of appendages, and a sensor suite up at the top. I mean, your head and with your eyes and your ears, all of that works really, really well. Human beings are good generalists. Dogs can't climb trees, and dolphins have a hard time on land and so forth. There are other remarkable capabilities and intelligence notwithstanding, the human form is pretty good. It may not be perfect. I mean, maybe there's a better general form that has some wheels, or that maybe looks more like an arthropod, a crab, or a spider or something, but the human form works pretty darn well. So I think that there's a lot to be said for the humanoid robot as a general platform for robotics capability writ large. The world's built for that form. We know it works. We're familiar with it, so it's unintimidating. I mean, I think people probably be a little more intimidated working next to a giant metal crab than they were next to an Optimus robot or a Figure One robot or any of the other prominent examples that we're seeing in development. But that could change in the longer term. Specialized forms are likely to be developed and deployed eventually, and maybe we will find a better generalized form. Ecology and biology are existence proofs of this, right? There's not any one ideal way to be an animal. There are many, many hundreds, thousands, millions of specific niches that require optimized forms to succeed in them. So we know that this is the case, and probably that's coming. But in the near term, I think it makes sense to expect the humanoid form to dominate. And then the other thing that's easy to forget, because we naturally freight in our presumptions, our anthropomorphizing, based on our human form and our human experience. But in the case of robots, because they can learn instantly, they can have skill transfer as easily as a download. The value of generality just gets dialed up to another level. So if you are a general robot and you can learn new skills instantly, like not even overnight, but like over the air, and you can be redeployed, literally overnight. You can work in a factory one day and a restaurant the next, and even the battlefield on the day after that. That redeployability and reskilling capability that all robots will have by virtue of their digital intelligence, as opposed to the old-fashioned organic intelligence that we have. By not having those constraints, the general purpose form becomes more valuable, right? If you're specialized, you can't redeploy into a new environment because you're not general purpose. So I think that aspect of digital intelligence increases the relative value of a general purpose robot. So putting all of those things together, that's why we were drawn to the humanoid robot as almost certainly the key disruptor of human labor, at least over the next decade or two.
Yeah. I think the very interesting takeaway there is like, when you think about, you were talking about our form factor being just fantastic for general use case. And then, we all have the same makeup of muscles and joints and everything, but we have differing levels of strength. We have different levels of dexterity. We have different levels of patience and laziness, So it's like that's why we have that saying, like, jack of all trades, master of none, like some people are very focused. But to me, it's like what you just talked about, it's jack of all trades, master of all, right? That's the kind of vibe that this humanoid robot brings with it. And I think that's what might be difficult to conceptualize because we don't have that right now, where we have a humanoid robot that can do all those things yet. But the path, like we've talked about here, the path seems clear that eventually, with the combination of costs coming down and manufacturing capabilities becoming better, which will bring the cost down, and the development of artificial intelligence, which will give the robot the brain for it to do whatever it needs to do, then as long as the tasks aren't above the limit of the robot's physical capabilities, in theory, the brain should be able to do everything. So it's like literally short of the actuators not being able to be strong enough. If you download it in the brain, given that the AI will be able to just do whatever it needs to do the thing that you want it to do and learn however it needs to learn, everything breaks, right? Over time, it feels like everything breaks. And I say breaks, meaning like the way we think about labor, like you guys have written, the way we think about what an economy is and so on and so forth. Elon Musk has talked about it in the past. So walk me through how do you see each industry being disrupted in the next 10 to 15 years? Like, where does it start? How does it evolve? How many humanoid robots are we going to have? Because if you're the one thing you wrote on the piece, the team wrote on the piece was that we're going to move away from jobs to tasks, and that's kind of what you talked about too. Is like you could be folding laundry, and then you're freaking trying to find mines on the on the battlefield, right? Like I don't know a lot of people that are willing to do that kind of that kind of gig economy type stuff, right? So just kind of walk me through that a little bit. Like maybe give us a little bit more of a solid like how does the next few years look like from an industry disruption perspective, and then I'm sure this will turn into a crazy discussion here in a second. If it hasn't already.
The getting from here to there, right? That is the challenge. And the truth is that nobody knows. There's no crystal ball. There's no way to perfectly predict exactly what's going to happen over the next 10 to 15 years. The key is to have principles in place that guide you so number one, massive change is coming. Number two, you have principles guiding your response in anticipation of that change. We have to have principles that work like be open-minded, be willing to experiment, don't fear failure. Nobody knows exactly how to get this right. We know it's a huge, big deal for human civilization at every level, but nobody knows how this is going to work out in the details. We've got to figure that out. And anybody could be a winner. It's anybody's race to win right now. It's anybody's game right now. And so you need to be guided by principles like experiment, learn by looking around you, learn from your own failures, and don't be afraid to fail. and so on. Those are the sorts of things that we need to be positioning ourselves with. We've learned the hard way how difficult it is to predict the impacts, the total implications of a new technology, right? Even if you can see some of the details, it's often hard to picture the granularity and all of the interactions there. And it's often difficult to see the downsides or the upsides, depending on your attitude, depending on your orientation. It's easy to focus on all the good things that could happen or all of the bad things that could happen, and not on the nuance in between and how, like you said, we get from here to there. So I don't have answers. I think the best thing that we can do is ask the right questions. That's what we need to be doing at this early stage in the disruption. Ask the right questions and have a posture of open-mindedness and learning,